Aside from the usual motley collection of the typical entries for Bluetooth radios, or rather Bluetooth speakers in the B&H catalog, there is, much to my surprise and amazement, still some conventional AM and FM radios and stereo systems available for sale, devoid of all the concessions to frivolity. This Tivoli Model One is just a conventional AM and FM radio receiver. It does come with Bluetooth. I'm unaware currently of the existence of any Tivoli Model 1s that did not have Bluetooth, although it stands to reason that the very early model obviously lacked Bluetooth, but again, could be wrong. There's the Tivoli Audio PAL BT. My experience, when the local Barnes & Noble put a couple of these out for demonstration and allowed you to power them on and listen to them, reception was just dreadful. I don't know if that was because it was in a very large store with many sources of interference, or it was just focused more on the Bluetooth aspect and not so much on the AM and FM. Not too sure. As you can see, these fetch a pretty penny. Newest and fully equipped model with all the bells and whistles. $350. For that price, you can buy yourself a proper component-based stereo system. For those FM and AM radio aficionados seeking an inexpensive alternative to something like the Tivoli Model 1 or similar, there do exist alternatives from different brand names such as Grundig. Well, that's the only one that's immediately coming to my mind right now, aside from this brand, Sangean. This is the Sangean WR-2 FM-RDS AM wooden cabinet table radio. 10 station presets, 5 FM and AM, easy to read LCD, digital tuning system, dynamic bass compensation for rich bass, rotary bass and treble control, and then what's claimed to be a 7-watt full range speaker with an enlarged magnet touted to improve its bass response appreciably, and 9 to 15 voltage power adapter socket for operating this in your vehicle. That's a sure sign and a prerequisite for anything to be modern these days. Glossy finish. Of course, for some reason, despite ordering the model with the wood grain finish and a silver face, I've received one that looks like pretty much every other piece of electronic stereo equipment these days, with everything is a glossy black plastic. Yeah, this is definitely not wood. And some instructions and disclaimers and a warranty. Well, at least they go so far as to include a pamphlet cautioning you from using the AC adapter in close proximity to the AM radio. Yep, it's one of those switching mode power supplies, but I find it interesting that this doesn't use an external AC adapter, but yet it mentions it on this piece of paper, because this just uses a standard figure of 8 power connection, near ubiquitous on boomboxes and the like. So I really don't know what they're talking about there, unless they're speaking of the 12-volt DC adapter, but again, it says explicitly here AC adapter. It does give you a phone number to contact, which can't be said for many of these fly-by-night operations these days. Can't even get into contact with somebody if you have a problem or concern. A hard copy paper manual, totally uncharacteristic of a modern piece of electronic equipment with an AM and FM tuner. We actually have the provisions for connecting an external AM antenna and a ground, and an FM antenna connection, internal and external. And what they actually do is include a European style coaxial cable connector that you just push on, and it's of decent length, probably tuned to the wavelength of FM, or at least half the wavelength, because I'm sure this would have to be much longer for that. I believe this is what they mean when they say to switch it to the internal antenna, and then when you set it to external, perhaps it changes the tuning circuitry. It's an aux input, a record output. Flipping it around, nothing much exciting aside from some rubber feet. The front of the radio is populated with the usual controls you'd expect to find on any self-respecting AM and FM radio that bills itself as such. A band selection button, some presets again for AM and FM, 5 for AM and 5 for FM, info button for what I presume to be alternating between the radio data system entries provided by the radio station you happen to be listening to, a NAP button for probably some sort of alarm clock functionality, a mono button for reverting to FM mono, a menu button, and there is the headphone jack. So not too sure what the connection on the rear that is covered by this plate, and this actually becomes quite bright with a dimmer setting all the way of 7, being its brightest setting of course. For easy recognition of the power button, behind it is a small backlight. Only seems to be on the right side of it, but it still allows you to easily recognize which button will turn it on. Rotary control for tuning, volume. Keep in mind this is a digital tuner mechanism, so there's no tuning knob, no tuning wheel or string in here. This will just turn endlessly and never stop. Same is true with the volume control. But what do you expect for a modern piece of electronic equipment? Powering it on. Probably won't hear anything without its included antenna connected. And this is capable of receiving R.D.S. clock time, amazingly, and conveniently at that. It's actually, if I switch to info now, so you can alternate between displaying the frequency and then it'll at first automatically display the R.D.S. song info, but it'll usually revert back to the time. And then to switch it back, you have to press info again. You do get the point of what's playing, but it is slightly cumbersome how R.D.S. is implemented to display song titles and artists. See, now that I've manually set it to display the song info, it'll continue to do that. It won't switch back to the time. The genre. Oh, see, this must be an alternative means by which you can display the R.D.S. info. This is actually easier to view and what's intended to be viewed by the radio station. And then the date and time. And right off the bat, even with the volume set to conservative levels, I'd say that sounds more than acceptable. That sounds excellent.
DHA Rock coming your way next. We'll do some Zeppelin and the Police.
There are many things you can do with your head.
There are some options available for configuration by the end user by pressing the menu button. Clock setting, which you use the tuning knob to set and alternate through the menus. Clock set, date set, and you manually configure that. And see, this is where you enable and disable the R.D.S. clock time functionality. If I push this in, change it to manual, but I wouldn't bother doing that since this will just access the date and time being sent from the radio station. Turning the loudness function off does make a difference. And in fact, with it off, this sounds just about the same as all those other run-of-the-mill AM and FM tuners and radios with built-in speakers. If you'll notice now, I'm tuned into FM 101.1. No, that's not what I wanted. You can see the stereo button or indicator at the top of the display. But even on weaker stations, I'm not hearing any FM stereo hiss. I believe it just is there to indicate the existence of a stereo signal if you were to use the headphone jack, but when using its internal speaker, it reverts to FM mono. As is typical for radios offering the ability to set presets, you just program them by pressing and holding the preset button for whichever numerical preset you wish to save the station to. See, now I can change just by pressing the buttons. This is one of the few radio stations actually broadcasting music. Would be typical for the format, the time frame this music was popular. And I've noticed that this also has a near exceptional AM antenna inside it. Probably just a basic loop stick, but very few radios I have are able to tune in to this station with any amount of listenability. Of course, it's quite late at night right now. Interference and so-called ghosting and fading in and out of the signal is to be expected.
By night, by day highbrow. Out in my room, I wonder that your advice. Moments outlasted.
Jeff Jensen, our next report at 2:51 on 1010 Wins.
Wins News Time 2:42. Governors Cuomo and Christie say they've had enough of Amtrak's management defense station. They released a joint letter calling on the CEO of Amtrak to find a private operator to take over America's busiest rail station.
If you noticed during those previous demonstrations of its FM and AM tuner, I was actually connected to the unit's headphone output, even though it does offer a line level output. I noticed that for some reason the line output doesn't appear or sound to work unless I hold this with its front panel facing down and being pushed in. And then for some reason the audio is output through its line output, but for the rest of the time when this is sitting upright, I wasn't getting any audio out of the right channel. So perhaps something wasn't connected correctly at the factory or has a loose connection. I'm sure that problem can be ascribed to something out of my control, since I tried two different line level 3.5mm patch cords with this camcorder and they all exhibited the same issue, but the headphone output did not.